Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susan Howard, a local Brookline attorney with a focus on family violence, and this is the Safety Net, Brookline Interactive Group show, usually dedicated to fighting domestic violence, but today we're doing something so very special because we have a most special guest. Joy Winkie Viola is, I don't even know how to describe her. She's an author, she's a birder, she's a dog lover, she's a phenomenal baker. She was aide to A's and O's at Northeastern for many years. She's a world traveler, she's a photographer, and she's also a golden lover, and you'll hear more about that at the end of the show. So now I am going to turn the show over to Joy, and the purpose of having Joy is, number one, for you to get to know from Schnitzel to Nockerln, and also to hear about a most amazing, loving, fabulous relationship with her husband and the results of that relationship. Joy, welcome to the Safety Net. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to share the book and the story with you. Let me begin by explaining the name, because no, it's not a cookbook. This is Schnitzel to Nockerln, because my husband was Viennese, and the first meal I cooked for him was Meter Schnitzel. And the last, before I lost him to COVID-19, was Viennese Nockerln, which is sort of like Spätzle on steroids, if you know German Spätzle. It's a flour, sugar, and milk dough that you drop into boiling water. And I have it, I have the recipe on my website because so many people asked for it. How the book came about. Alfred was in a nursing home and contacted COVID, and I began reading to him from our old travel diaries, of which I had 46, because we have traveled all over to all 7 continents doing wildlife photography. And I began to realize there were a lot of good stories here. So when he passed, I started to put them together, some of them, 10 of them, into this book. And we began our life together, traveling out west, camping for the most part, from the Rocky Mountains, from Arizona to British Columbia. And up in British Columbia, we had quite an experience. We signed up for a 2-day pack horse trip. Now, I had a horse when I was a kid, but I wasn't a good rider, and Alfred had been on a horse only once, and it wasn't a particularly happy experience. But part of the good relationship for 56 years is try to do what each other wants to do, and I wanted to try to take this trip. So we spent 2 days on pack horses under the aegis of this gentleman, Erling Strom. And he was kind of a crusty Norwegian, but he was in the Hall of Fame cross-country ski listings, and he ran Assiniboine Lodge for nearly 50 years. Well, we drove from Banff, British Columbia, up to where we were to leave the car and get on the horses. And I was about 10 miles out of Banff, and our luggage was packed in duffel bags, as we had been told to do. But then there was the lawn chair. And as you'll see here, where the cowboy is launching it, Erling said, and I'll read from the book here, "I'm supposed to pack a lawn chair on the back of a horse?" he asked. "Well, no, Erling, it's actually part of a photo blind. You see, there's a metal rim that goes across the top and a camouflage canvas. Well, I once had a lady who wanted to pack in 8 rolls of toilet paper, but this takes the cake." He shook his head in bewilderment, but then instructed one of the cowboys to put the canvas-webbed lawn chair on a pack horse. We rode all day and then bunked at night at a halfway house and started out again in the morning. And again, the day was July 4th. The pack horses were loaded. We started out, the trail took us over a pass, and I'm reading from the book here, and into a valley where we stopped for lunch. An outgoing pair of wranglers and pack horses told Erling that Og Pass was still snowed in, so we'd have to go across the Assiniboine Pass. Well, the latter had many snowslides and down trees everywhere. The horses picked their way carefully around the trees. By the tail began to climb a series of switchbacks, and we were traversing loose shale and a steep mountain slope, which had me absolutely terrified. I'd like to get down and walk, I called to Erling. You sit there, he replied. Give the horse her reins. She knows what she's doing, even if you don't. I sat there like a scolded puppy, my head down as I gave my horse her reins. It made sense. The horse didn't want to fall down the mountainside, and she'd done this before. At the top of the second pass, it began to snow lightly, and then with more vigor. We headed back down, then began to climb once again. Suddenly, I looked up the mountain trail, and before me, I saw the Norwegian and Canadian flags. We'd made it. Well, we spent 10 days in this beautiful setting at Mount Assiniboine. And while we were there, we were visited by Tenzing Norgay, who was the Sherpa to Sir Edmund Hillary on his quest of Mount Everest. Wow. He was a very sweet, very humble man, and we sat and had tea and talked about Sir Edmund and the climb. It was quite a thrill. But from the Canadian Rockies, and on this particular program today, I'm just hitting a few highlights. My book covers many more trips, but we're going to move on from the Canadian Rockies to the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. And these are off the coast of Venezuela. And we stayed first in Trinidad at the Acerite Nature Center, which was a mecca for birders. And then we were told, well, if you go to Trinidad, you've got to go to Tobago, and you should try to stay with Mrs. Alefounder. Okay, so we wrote to Mrs. Alefounder and inquired if we might stay with her. And this was her Grafton estate. Again, I'll read from the book. The beautiful old plantation home had a unique open-air architecture. There were no screens on the windows, though, so a bird flyby through the living room was not uncommon. Mrs. Alefounder was a kind-hearted but somewhat eccentric woman with white hair twisted into a single braid that hung down her back. She had a high-pitched voice with a very prominent upper-crust English accent. The entrance to her home was via a central set of 10 stairs, which you see here, which then merged into a long double stairway, sort of reminiscent of the old MGM musicals with Fred Astaire dancing up and down. But there were no chorus girls on these stairs, just large toads with the acrobatic ability to hop their way up the steps, which they did every evening. And the dining room became a ballroom for the toads, attracted by the insects, which were attracted by the lights. After dinner, we had an amazing wildlife show because the geckos were darting in and out behind the picture frames on the walls, and the toads were hopping around the floor, and the wood rats were scampering in the trees, and the ants were on the large pillars. We were shown to our bedroom suite with dressing room and bath, noting a mosquito net over each of the 2 beds and bird droppings on the floor between the beds. Ew. Oh, exclaimed Mrs. Alefounder, you have to share the room with a motmot. He roasts on the light cord. Okay, this is going to be interesting, I thought. And that's why the chapter is entitled A Banana Quit in My Lemonade and a Motmot in My Bedroom. Well, let me show you that the motmot is the bird in the lower left corner. He's about crow-sized, but very pretty, with a long pendulum tail like 2 upside-down tennis racks. And the little bird with the yellow throat is a banana quit, and he has a sweet tooth. And if you happen to have a sugar open on the table, he'll help himself. And if you have lemonade in a glass, he'll help himself to that too. And this is a lovely robin of the area with feeding a worm to her babies. Well, we're going to jump now to Africa. As I said, we're going around the world very quickly here. This is Mount Kilimanjaro in the background, which is also actually in Tanzania, but we're in Kenya. And this combi is the means that one goes about on a safari. And the safari is great until you get a safari jam. You may have heard of bear jams in Yellowstone Park when somebody sees a bear. This is a combi jam, and it got us very upset to the point where Alfred and I were yelling at these people to back up because the cheetah had just managed to make a kill and feed her young cubs. And she hadn't fed them in 3 days. And the game wardens were getting very concerned about this. The problem is that the cheetah hunts by day because she uses her speed to kill her prey. She doesn't stalk at night. Well, the tourists are out during the day, and every time they'd see a cheetah, they'd follow her. We followed her for 9 hours that day, way back, using our binoculars to see where she was, but not wanting to interrupt her kill. But the minute she made a kill and we had stopped, then all the combis appeared. This is one of the things that's sort of a problem with safaris. The other is, of course, the poaching. And I could go on and share other pictures about elephants and how you read body language of when they're just trying to show off their youth and teenagers and when they mean it for sure. But we're going to move on. I can't do that without showing you one lion because I happen to have a thing about lions. And this fellow had laid there for a long time, and the guide said, "Is everybody ready to go?" And I said, "No." I said, "I haven't seen his eyes." He said, "Okay, we'll wait." And finally he turned. You always want to get the eyes if you can when you get the wildlife shot. Well, we're going to move on from Africa to a very distant place, to the ice shelves of Antarctica. And this happened to be our 7th continent when we landed on Antarctica. Alfred and I had been on all 6 doing wildlife photography and leading tours. Antarctica just makes you seem so insignificant. It's so vast and it belongs to nobody. It's a magnificent planet. But the only way you're going to get ashore, and there aren't too many places where you can get ashore because of those ice cliffs, is to go by Zodiac. Now, one of the things that I talk about in my lectures is being willing to take the road less traveled by and go someplace different. You also have to be willing to venture out of your comfort zone. And I want to tell you, I was definitely out of my comfort zone here. I can't swim. I'm afraid of the water. The seas are bouncing around, and I have to get into Zodiac and hold on for dear life. But it was the only way that I was going to see what I came to see, 100,000 king penguins.
Wow.
And the ship is in the distance there, but they are all over the shore and all the way up the mountainside. And they're able to feed their chick by the voice. They know the voice of their chick. And they will go through all these crowds of other penguins and get pecked in territorial battles and so forth until they find their chick. Well, we're going to jump to the other end of the pole now and be up at Hudson Bay. I've often said with all the trips that we've taken, there's probably 3 that are the most exciting to me. Our first trip to Africa, we ended up doing 7 safaris, and we led safaris for some time. Antarctica, and this one up at Hudson Bay in Churchill, Manitoba. We were out on a tundra buggy train. Now, the tundra buggy in the front is where we would unhitch and go during the day to photograph polar bears. And Alfred and I went in 2 different tundra buggies, and they were so surprised about that. They said, "Don't you want to be together?" And we said, "No, we're going to duplicate each other's shots if we do that." So we went our separate ways, and then we had the fun in the evening of saying, "What did you get? And what did I get? And what did I miss? And what did you miss?" And then the little windows that one sees along the pictures, those were our bunk beds. And there were 16 of us in each one, top and bottom. 2 bathrooms that we shared, and then a lounge and the dining room and the kitchen. And when we moved from Churchill about 50 miles out to the shore of the Hudson Bay, and this was in November, we were waiting for the ice to form. It was the last trip of the year. And the whole reason for going out there was this, to see the polar bears. In the back of the buggy, and you can see people hanging out the windows and taking pictures. The buggies are like a school bus mounted on huge tires. And the back caboose that you see with no windows is 10 feet up. Well, you can see the polar bear on the left isn't quite there, but on the other hand, the polar bear on the right most definitely is, because when a polar bear stands on his back legs, he can be as tall as 12 feet tall. And some of them were. So let me read again from the book. November 23rd, today is Thanksgiving Day in the Arctic. This afternoon, we saw the biggest bear we have seen thus far. He was a colossal male. I named him Brownie because his feet and legs were brown. That's how I managed to distinguish between the different bears. They all had something distinctive: colorations or scars, bedroom slipper feet, or feet that looked like they just had a pedicure. When Brownie stood on his hind legs, he was probably 12 feet tall and weighed 1,000 pounds. The bottom of the tundra buggy windows are 10 feet off the ground, and Brownie's head was above that mark. In the course of our visit, I photographed 43 different bears, which I was able to identify by the scars, the colorations, and so forth on their bodies. November 25th, Cape Churchill. One of the bears ambled over to the side of the tundra buggy, so I decided to go to the back caboose, back in the back where there were no windows, nothing to keep me away from the bear, and meet this bear on the platform. Okay, bear, I asked him, are you ready for your close-up? I established eye contact with him. He slowly sauntered over and then began to rise up on his back legs. We'd seen other bears playing, and we'd seen mothers with cubs, but this was a big bear, and I had him all to myself on that caboose platform. I leaned over the edge of the platform, looking directly at his face. He came higher and higher. He got closer and closer. Pretty soon, I couldn't focus anymore. And I pulled my camera away, and I had the face of a polar bear 12 inches from my face. I could feel his breath and smell it. And then it happened. And I'm not going to tell you what happened. You have to read the book to find out. Well, we're going to move on again, leaving Per Magnus, to a rather unusual trip. I've written 2 books before, but they're academic books and they're not fun like this one is. But I did a book on Saudi Arabian manpower. I was Dean of International Affairs at Northeastern University and senior editor of an international encyclopedia of higher education. So I got interested in the fact that multinational corporations were in the education business. And I decided I'd like to go do a case study on Saudi Arabia and Aramco, the Arabian American Oil Company, and what they'd had to do to educate manpower who were illiterate. And the Americans only knew the word for up, and the Saudis knew the word for down, and they had to drill down. It was pretty interesting initially in the 1940s. Well, I got invited because of the first draft of the book to come to Saudi Arabia. And I never forget the day I came in my office and I saw this big envelope with Arabic script and postage stamps. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'd been denied a visa 3 times, but then they saw the first version of my book and I was invited to come. So my secretary made me long skirts, and I had high neck blouses with long sleeves. I didn't wear an abaya, I didn't cover my hair, but I tried to be mindful of their customs, and that was acceptable to them. So let me read from the opening paragraph of the chapter, which says, "And then there was joy in Saudi Arabia." It was April 25th, and I was having lunch at the racetrack, the King Abdulaziz racetrack in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I was a single American woman dining with 7 Saudi sheiks in a socially segregated country. I looked at my luncheon companions, all of them presidents, vice presidents, heads of banks, lawyers, what have you. And I remarked, "Gentlemen, you make a pretty good looking reverse harem." They got quite a kick out of that, and they all wanted to have a copy of the picture. Later that week, I sat on a carpet-covered lawn with a Saudi prince discussing Saudi manpower. And the interesting thing was he had an article that had been published in the States only 3 days before, which quoted my first book. That night, when I finished meeting with him, and I had an interesting schedule because you met with the Saudis in the morning, then they took a siesta and you met with the American corporations, and then the Saudis came back in the evening. And so I finished with him about 7 in the evening, and my day had just started because I had to go home, get into a long evening gown, which I had brought, because I was going to an engagement party. And I write about this at length in the book, what it was like to see hundreds of women in ball gowns that looked like came right out of Gone with the Wind, the most beautiful fabrics I'd ever seen. But the women were all celebrating in one room and the men were all celebrating in the other. And I came home at 3 o'clock in the morning to the Hilton Hotel. And if you want to know what I was doing until 3 o'clock in the morning, then you're going to have to read the book again. Can't give away all the secrets. All of these stories and more came from the diaries that I wrote at the time that I was on the trip. Every night I would write, and sometimes it was 11, 12 o'clock at night, but it was important to get the freshness of the day. And those who read the book all say, I felt like I was right with you in the scene as you were writing it. And that's because they were written in the present tense, right after the time. So the book is available at the Brookline Booksmith. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I hope you may want to read more of it. This is just a bit of a little appetizer for you. So Susan, I hope this
Joy, this was wonderful, particularly during these days, which seem to be so dark, to see so many places in the world where there was so much joy. Is it my understanding that the proceeds of the book are being donated to a special charity?
Yes, that's right. After I retired from Northeastern, I started about 30 years, I'll admit, I'm 85, fundraising for Golden Retriever causes.
And Joy, is there a Golden Retriever near you?
Yes. Apollo,
I see a little head bouncing up and down. Could we see?
Apollo, would you like to come say hello? Come over. Come on.
Oh, wow.
Apollo, come on. Get up. Come on. Come over. Come here. Come on. Yes, Anna wants to say hello too. Come on.
Yes, hi. Okay. Oh, wow.
Here's my golden boy, Apollo. He's a rescue from Yankee Golden Retriever Rescue. And I raised the $1.5 million for the facility that they have in Hudson. Then I went on to the Golden Retriever Foundation and I raised another $1.5 million for canine cancer research with the Golden Retriever Foundation and Rescue. And now I've been raising money as the Friends of Goosekin, which is where the Golden Retriever originated in the Scottish Highlands. We have a bronze statue there, but now we're going to have a plaque saying this is the birthplace of the Golden Retriever. And the profits from the book will go for that $15,000 stone marker. So that's where it's going to go.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing. And I have a couple of questions as to the pictures. The polar bear. Yes. You said that they had bruises. Did the polar bear that you took the picture of the face up close, did it have a scar on?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, it was a big scar, Joy.
Well, they've been fighting, obviously. And that's how I was able, I have an album, and which I've never done with our trips before, but as I was looking at them, I saw, wait a minute, this is not the same polar bear as that one. And so I named them all. And that's how I found out that I had photographed 43 different polar bears.
Wow, I noticed the scar because you had alerted us to it. And I want to ask you, and I don't know how to say this politely, but the penguins looked really robust. They looked heavy.
Well, they are. They're full of krill, which is a small shrimp-like animal. And one of the concerns with climate change and global warming. As you may have heard recently in the paper, Antarctica had a 70-degree difference, the warmest ever recorded there. Well, the krill like cold waters. And if the krill move away and the ice melts, then the penguins have further to go to feed their young. And there have been die-offs of groups of penguins because they just had too far to waddle on the ice to get to the water to dive in and fish for the krill and then come back and waddle back to their young. So yes, it's a major issue down there at this point, just as it is for the polar bears in the north. And they can't get off at the edge. We were there the very end of the season when the bears were along the coast waiting for the freeze up so they could go out and hunt the seals. And they hadn't had anything to eat in months. So
have you been there since climate change has had its significant effect on?
No, okay. I haven't. But I do know that they haven't run the tundra buggies for the last 2 years because of COVID, which you couldn't, with 16 of us packed into one of those. You just couldn't do it.
And then I had another question. You mentioned the 3 trips that I guess were so meaningful to you: African safaris, Antarctica, and Hudson Bay. Mm-hmm. Did I get that right? Yeah, those were the 3.
Yes.
Are you planning to go back to any of those?
I rarely go back except Africa, because I just have a thing about Africa, and we've gone back several times. We first went, and then the next year, the Northeastern Alumni Office asked us to lead a tour, and we took a group, and then they said, well, where are you going to take us next? So we ended up taking a tour to Australia, and then we went back and did a tented safari in Africa. So I'm not sure. I just came back from Costa Rica in January, birding at 7,200 feet. And I was up in the national park, which was 11,200 feet.
Wow.
But I haven't even got my photos sorted from those yet, so I haven't looked to where I would like to go next. And of course, now Alfred has passed, so I'm traveling alone, and that makes a bit of a difference too.
Yes, it does make a difference. And I want to ask you a question. What do you think this wonderful success of your marriage to Alfred and all that you did together, what do you think was the key factor that made you such a fabulous couple?
Well, I think one thing, we took our vows seriously, for better or for worse. We had the better for many years. At the end, we had the worst. I think respect is very important. Alfred was professor of organic chemistry, and I couldn't even figure out a slide rule in physics in high school. I was the literary one, but he beat me in Scrabble, and that used to get me. But I think mutual respect, I'm sometimes taken aback when I hear how people might speak about their spouse. We would never say anything negative about each other in public. That was private. The other, I think, is listen. We were 2 very different people. Alfred came from Vienna. He was a victim of the Nazi invasion, and I was a Midwest Minnesota girl. Very different backgrounds, and we certainly had disagreements at times, but we learned to listen to what the other one was saying and not doing all the talking. And I think growing together. I mean, he was not a birder when he met me.
Really?
And oh no. And I had been a birder since my mother started me when I was 8 years old. So he would sit down and study the field guides, but he'd done some photography. But the whole idea of the wildlife photography, and initially he did the birds and animals and I did the wildflowers and the scenery until we got to Africa and we had elephants and all kinds of things that were big animals, and then we started shooting everything. But we grew together, building an interest, and that was true with the golden retrievers. He'd never had a dog before, and
oh my gosh.
So and yet we ended up giving the naming gift to the Yankee Golden Retriever Rescue Shelter, and that was Alfred's idea. So we grew together in ways that we had not been as individuals. And I think that's important too. And no
Joy
grudge.
Viola, what a treat for you to share all of this with our audience. I am so grateful to you. And since you have so many other pictures that we have not seen, I'm
Oh, yeah.
issuing an invitation for you to come back soon and share, not to give away the book, Booksmith. We're in Brookline. Go to
Yes.
Booksmith, Amazon, and there's some other place, isn't it? In
Yes, Barnes and Noble, and you can order it directly from me on my website, and then I will personally inscribe, not just sign, but inscribe to anybody that orders it directly to me.
And will you give your contact information, if you haven't, to Ian Bauer, our marvelous producer who has put all these pictures in order as Joy has requested? Joy, thank you so much. Again, please, in Brookline, go to the Booksmith. And Joy Viola, many, many, many happy days. Many.
Thank you.
Peaceful and healthy.
You can just go on to www.joywinkieviola.com. That's my website.
Okay, thank you again. And that's a very special show for the Safety Net. And we'll see you all next time. Bye.